Now I would like to turn our attention in this fourth video for this week to the role of Barnabas in the book of Acts by S. Jonathan Murphy. All right, so first thing I want to know is who is S. Jonathan Murphy? Notice at the bottom here, this 2010 article was written by Mr. Murphy, who is a senior pastor of Newcastle Baptist Church in Newcastle, Northern Ireland, and research writer for Sacrascript Ministries. Right. So, what might that tell us? It might tell us that he has a certain way of doing the work that he does. It might tell us something about his theological priorities. It might not. It might tell us something about his intended audience. It might not. Because certainly theological scholars speak to pastoral concerns as do pastors speak to theological or scholarly concerns. So that's just a little bit there. So thesis, strengths, weaknesses, intended audience, critique, all of those things, and then the reflection piece we do for this article as well. So let me give you a hint about the thesis. The very first line, Barnabas plays an important role in the book of Acts. Now, it would be really, really tempting to say that's the thesis. Now, I'm not going to tell you what I think the thesis is. I've done that in past weeks. I'm not going to do that this week. I will say I think it's in that first paragraph. But I don't think that first statement is really the thesis. That is that the argument, this is the question I ask myself, is that the argument that Murphy is going to try to press throughout this article? Is that what he's going to kind of use to guide what he does? And if so, then I should be able to use that as my lens, if the article is written well, for example. I should be able to use that as my lens to read the rest of the article and say, he proves his point, he doesn't prove his point. He proves his point, he doesn't prove his point. It could be that that statement, which I do not think is the thesis, it could be that that statement is a broad statement, and what we need to get from Murphy is where he's drilling down to the point of making a more exact argument. One of the things that we try to do in this part of the academic world is we try to hone our arguments down to the point where we can actually manage them. Most things are complex, and as a result of that, they take a lot of time to develop. This particular article, 22 pages. What can you really develop in 22 pages? How much can you really say? To say Barnabas plays an important role in the book of Acts, that seems way too broad to me, right? So now it may not seem broad to you, but that's the value of having someone who does what I do kind of speak into this this process, and others that you know are concerned with the theological discipline, right? So I'm wanting to hone that down. Is that what you're going to try to prove in 22 pages? Or are you going to try to get more precise? The more precise argument, typically in the introduction, the more precise argument tends to be the thesis, because that is what you can get your hands around and kind of prove, right? So that's why I look at that statement, and as I continue to read, and I thought maybe at first, maybe we have 3 weeks in a row where the thesis is so very, very clear right from the get-go. And as I continue to read, I'm not sure that's it. Now, if you think it is, then I want you to make that case. I'm making the video, so I have to go with my gut, right? But this is a conversation. And this is the way I do things, but that may not be. Theologians, we don't always think in terms of right and wrong about these kinds of ideas. Now, there are things that I hold passionately, and I say, you know, I'm going to make my stand on this issue, but a thesis for an article is probably not it. right? So I want to see if there's a place where a writer hones his thinking into a more exact argument that can be proved throughout the course of the writing. And that's why I say I think there's something else here that we could look at that is more precise than this rather broad statement. So that's a little bit, very quickly, about the thesis and what I think is going on in Murphy. We'll come back and talk about strengths and weaknesses and the rest in just a minute.